On my 67th birthday, my son-in-law slapped me to the floor, then stormed into my bedroom with my daughter and tore through every drawer until they found the envelope holding my $500,000 inheritance check. He looked down at me and sneered, "You miserable old man," pretending to be broke. 20 minutes later, they walked into the bank, certain the money was already theirs. But the branch manager took one look at the check, quietly excused himself, and when he returned, 2 police cruisers were already outside. "Thank you for being here. It means more than I can say. Now let's connect. Comment below with your country or city. Show me how far this story travels." Note: this story blends fictional elements with storytelling crafted for education and reflection. Names and settings are not drawn from any one source, but every lesson inside is worth your full attention. The sirens reached the parking lot before I did. 6 weeks before that morning, I had sat across a mahogany table from a woman named Margaret Holloway in a conference room on Drayton Street. She slid a sealed envelope toward me with both hands and told me my brother Theodore had left very specific instructions. The check inside $500,000 was designated solely to me. One condition: I collect it in person at the branch on Bull Street with valid identification. I took the envelope home and put it in the nightstand drawer on the left side of my bed, beneath a copy of the King James Bible that had been there since my wife passed. I told no one it was there. I had not decided yet what to do with it, and decisions made before you are ready tend to cost more than the ones you wait for. I did not know when I opened my front door on my 67th birthday that Garrett already knew about the drawer. Doris told me later that he had been inside the house at least 3 times while I was out, enough visits apparently to learn where a man keeps the things he does not talk about. They arrived at noon, Marlene in a yellow dress, carrying a cake, Garrett with his hand already extended for a handshake that felt like a transaction. 20 minutes into the visit, he placed a document on the kitchen table and told me it would be better for everyone if I signed. I looked at the document. Then I looked at him. "No," I said. What happened next took less than 30 seconds. I went down hard against the edge of the table and then the floor. By the time I had my bearings, both of them were in the bedroom drawers, overturned the safe, taking heavy impacts until the door gave way. Then quiet. Marlene came back through the doorway holding the envelope. Garrett picked up his unsigned document, said, "I had made things harder than they needed to be," and walked out my front door. I lay on the kitchen floor a moment longer than I needed to. Then I got up, found my keys, and drove. I pulled into the parking lot across from the branch, just as 2 Savannah Police Department cruisers rolled up to the curb. Through the tall glass front, I could already see them, Garrett at the teller counter, with one hand flat on the marble, Marlene 3 feet behind him, staring at the floor. I climbed out of the car, pressed my arm against my side, and walked. A young officer put up a hand at the entrance. I told him the check inside had my name on it. He looked at the bruise spreading beneath my eye, the careful way I was holding myself together, and held the door open. Inside, everything had gone still. At the center of it stood Gerald Thornton, the branch manager, compact, silver-haired, the kind of man whose posture tells you he has been through difficult situations before and was not changed by any of them. Garrett saw me walk in and immediately shifted his tone, warm, surprised, the voice he used when he needed reasonable people to believe him. I told him to stop talking. An officer stepped between us before anything else could happen. I gave my statement to Officer Denzel, who wrote in a small notebook and asked careful questions. When I described the moment Garrett struck me, she stopped writing and looked directly at the bruise. "You need medical attention today," she said. Not a suggestion. Across the lobby, Gerald Thornton was quietly explaining something to the first officer. I caught fragments: verification protocol, beneficiary must be present. What that meant, I later understood, was this: 3 years before his death, Theodore had restructured his estate account as a payable on death account, naming me as the sole beneficiary. For a disbursement of this size, the branch's enhanced verification protocol required me to appear in person, present identification, and authorize the transaction directly with the branch manager. Theodore had requested that protocol in writing. Gerald Thornton had co-signed the arrangement. There was no exception. Theodore had made certain of that. No money had changed hands. No arrest was made. Garrett walked past me on his way out and leaned in close enough for me to hear him clearly. "You are making a very serious mistake," he said. I told him to get out of the bank. After they had gone, Gerald Thornton came and stood beside me. "Your brother contacted this branch 3 years ago and was very specific," he said quietly. Theodore Mercer was a careful man. He paused. A very careful man. Before I could ask what he meant by the way he said it, the glass door opened again. Everett Crane, 69 years old, retired. Savannah PD, 32 years, my closest friend, walked in, looked at the bruise under my eye, looked at the cruisers at the curb, and looked back at me. "Russell, how long has this been going on with Garrett, and how much of it don't I know yet?" It was not the voice of a man hearing bad news for the first time. I did not answer Everett's question right away. Not because I lacked the words, but because the moment I spoke them out loud, they would become permanent, the kind of truth you cannot unfold once it has been said. My face ached. My ribs ached worse. I pressed 2 fingers against the bruise beneath my left eye and let the sharp heat of it pull me back to the surface. "More than you know," I said finally. "A lot more than you know." Everett looked at me for a long moment, and I watched something move through his expression, a kind of heavy settling, like a man who has just had the thing he feared most confirmed out loud. His jaw tightened. He exhaled through his nose. "We'll talk," he said. "But right now you need to sit down before your legs give out." He was not wrong. The force of will that had carried me from my house to this building was fading quickly, and what remained beneath it was considerably less steady. Gerald Thornton, the branch manager, who had already shown himself to be a man of quiet competence, offered us the use of the small conference room at the back of the floor. 4 chairs, a rectangular table, a window overlooking a service alley. I lowered myself into the nearest chair, with my arm still braced against my side. Everett remained standing, positioned near the door, the way I had seen him stand in unfamiliar rooms for 32 years. We had been there for less than 10 minutes when the handle turned. The woman who entered was somewhere around 58, dressed in a charcoal suit that communicated authority without announcing it. She moved through the doorway without announcement, set her briefcase on the table, and looked at me directly before she said a word. "Mr. Mercer," she said, "I served as your brother Theodore's attorney for 13 years from 2009 until his death this past November. Gerald called me from this branch as soon as the check was presented this afternoon, exactly as Theodore arranged." She paused. "I am genuinely sorry that this call came at all." I stared at her. The information rearranged itself slowly. "Theodore had a lawyer." "He did," she said, taking the chair across from me. "And he spoke to me about you more often than you might expect." Everett stepped away from the door and sat down beside me. "What exactly did Theodore tell you about Garrett Price?" Margaret opened the briefcase and placed a folder on the table before she answered. "In June of 2020, Theodore came to my office and asked me to help him structure something he described as a precautionary arrangement. He wanted to leave a substantial amount of money to you, Mr. Mercer, but he needed that transfer protected against someone he believed would try to take it by force." She looked at me steadily. "He named Garrett Price by name." The temperature in the room felt like it dropped several degrees. I could feel my throat tighten. "He knew," I said. "He knew about Garrett and he never told me. He had strong suspicions," Margaret corrected gently but precisely. "He told me he had observed certain patterns over time, unauthorized access to your property during your absences." A document he glimpsed once that didn't look right to him, a series of behaviors from Mr. Price that he could not ignore. But he had no hard evidence, and Theodore was not a man who accused people without proof. She folded her hands on the folder. What he did have was the ability to plan ahead. He was not willing to hand you a large sum of money without ensuring that someone couldn't take it from you the moment it changed hands. My eyes burned. I blinked and looked at the ceiling for a moment, because I needed a second to keep myself together. Theodore had been carrying all of this. For 3 years he had been watching and thinking, and quietly arranging things in the dark, and he had never said a word to me. Not a word. Because that was who my brother was. He would rather handle a problem alone than burden someone else with knowing about it before it could be solved. So the arrangement with the bank, Everett said, his detective's mind already moving forward. Walk us through how that works legally. Theodore worked directly with this branch 14 months before his death, Margaret said. Gerald Thornton has the full arrangement on file. What matters now is why Theodore chose to build it that way and who he built it against. She set her hands flat on the folder. He named Garrett Price by name. She glanced toward the doorway where Gerald had briefly appeared and then quietly withdrawn. Theodore also required that my office be contacted by phone the moment the check was presented by anyone other than you. He told me in very plain terms, I remember his exact words, if that check walks into the bank without Russell, I want to know within the hour. The burn behind my eyes got worse. I pressed my lips together hard. He built the whole thing to catch them, I said. He built it to protect you, Margaret said. Her voice dropped slightly, and I heard something real underneath the professionalism. What happened after that was a consequence of their own choices, Mr. Mercer, not of his. Everett leaned forward, elbows on the table. You said you'd been expecting this call since Theodore passed. How long have you been ready for today? Since the morning of his funeral, she said without hesitation. She reached into the briefcase a second time and produced a sealed envelope. Cream-colored, letter-sized, sealed with a strip of tape. Theodore's handwriting on the front, that small, precise print of his that I would have recognized anywhere. She placed it in front of me without ceremony. He was very specific. This was to be given to you only after the check had been presented and the situation had been confirmed. She said it quietly. Those were his words. After the situation has been confirmed. My hand reached for the envelope before I had consciously decided to move. The paper was heavier than it looked. I broke the seal, carefully unfolded the page inside, and found Theodore's handwriting waiting for me exactly as it had always been, unhurried, deliberate, each letter placed like it meant something. I read the first line and my breath stopped completely. I read it a second time to make certain I had understood it correctly. There is more, I said. My voice had gone very quiet. There is a second section. Yes. Margaret did not look away. That section is the reason I asked Gerald to clear the rest of this room before I came in. The second section of Theodore's letter was only 8 lines long. He had always known how to be precise. The first section had told me what he suspected and why the unannounced visits to the property, when I was out the document, he glimpsed once on my kitchen counter and immediately recognized as wrong the pattern he had watched solidify over 2 years into something he could no longer dismiss. He had written it all down without bitterness, without self-pity, without the kind of dramatic language that would have made it easier for me to absorb. He was reporting facts the way he always had from the time we were boys, clearly in order and without decoration. Reading it felt like hearing his voice from across a room. That alone was almost more than I could carry. But the second section was the one Margaret had cleared the room for. There is a cavity in the wall directly behind your old safe, Theodore had written. I found it last Christmas when I helped you move it to clean behind it. The lower right panel gives way if you press at the corner with some force. When I looked inside, I found documents in a sealed plastic bag. I did not touch them. I did not want anyone to know I had seen them. But I wrote down what I could read from the front page of each one, and I am enclosing that list here. Russell, those documents do not belong to you. Whatever you do next, look behind the safe before you do anything else. Below his words, a handwritten list. Document types, institution names, approximate dates. My hands had begun to tremble somewhere around the second paragraph. A fine, involuntary shaking that started in my forearms and spread outward no matter how hard I pressed my palms flat against the table. I set the letter down and stared at it. "He found it," I said. My voice cracked on the first word. "He found it last Christmas, and he sat with me at dinner, and he never said a single word." Everett put his hand on my shoulder, a firm, unapologetic grip, the kind that means, hold yourself together right now. He stayed quiet, because if you knew, it would have changed how you acted around Garrett. He was protecting the evidence and protecting you at the same time. A beat. That is exactly what Theodore would do. It was. That was what made it so hard to hold on to myself in that moment. It was exactly him. Margaret was already on her feet, speaking in a measured voice that I was grateful for. "Copies of the list go to law enforcement tonight. The original letter remains in my custody. Mr. Mercer, before either of you goes anywhere near that house, you need medical attention." I started to push back on that. Everett's grip on my shoulder tightened before I finished the thought. "Non-negotiable," he said. "The injuries need to be documented while they are fresh. If this goes to a courtroom, and it will go to a courtroom you need records from tonight. Not tomorrow. Tonight." I nodded. He was right, and I knew he was right. Memorial Health Savannah was quiet for a Tuesday evening. A handful of people in the waiting area, soft overhead lighting the antiseptic smell of every hospital that has ever existed anywhere. The attending physician was a focused, deliberate woman named Dr. Patricia Webb, who had clearly worked emergency medicine long enough that the sight of someone coming in with bruising and a careful way of breathing did not visibly alarm her. She asked me twice each time, writing down exactly what I said, how I had sustained each injury. She asked whether I felt safe in my home. She photographed everything, the discoloration spreading below my left eye, the deep bruising along my left rib cage, where 2 fingers of pressure made me pull a sharp breath, the red marks across my right wrist, where Garrett had grabbed and held. When she finished, she closed the folder and looked at me without ceremony. "Mr. Mercer, the injuries you have tonight are medically consistent with physical assault. That is what the record will state. I have signed the documentation. It carries weight in Georgia State Court. Documenting on the day of the incident is significantly stronger than waiting." "Thank you," I said. "Please state it exactly that way." It was past 9 in the evening by the time Everett pulled to the curb on Abercorn Street. The outside of the house looked the same as it had every night for the past 40 years. The deep front porch, the old sycamore I kept meaning to trim the porch light I had never once remembered to turn off before leaving. Nothing from the outside told you what the afternoon had done to the inside. The front door was still unlocked. I had left too fast to close it properly. Inside was a different thing entirely. Drawers pulled out and overturned, their contents scattered across the bedroom floor. The closet door hanging open, clothes shoved aside, the upper boxes torn down and split. And at the center of the room, the old safe knocked hard off its base, its door bent outward at a brutal angle, the wood flooring beneath it gouged where something heavy had been swung against it again and again. Everett moved through the space methodically, photographing every corner before touching anything. He did not comment on the destruction. He documented it the way he had documented crime scenes for 30 years, completely and without editorial. A sharp double knock came from the open window. "Russell!" The voice was familiar and urgent. "Russell, your lights are on. Are you in there?" Doris Kemper was 71 years old and had been my next-door neighbor for 18 years. She was standing on the narrow path between our houses in her slippers holding a folded piece of notebook paper. When she saw the wreckage through the window, her face went through several things in quick succession before settling into something tight and resolved. "I kept the plate number," she said, and held the paper out to me. "That man's car was here 3 times this past week. Every time you were at church or running errands. Something felt wrong, so I started writing things down. I didn't know what else to do with it." I reached through the window frame and took the paper from her. My throat was so tight it hurt to swallow. "Thank you, Doris," I managed. "That was exactly the right thing." Behind me, I heard Everett go still. I turned to find him crouched beside the overturned safe, pressing his fingers against the lower right section of the baseboard wall behind it. The panel shifted under his hand. He pressed again at the corner. A section of drywall disengaged from the wall with a dry, hollow sound, revealing a gap in the framing behind it. He reached inside carefully and withdrew a clear plastic bag sealed across the top. He laid it flat on the floor and looked up at me. His expression had gone completely unreadable, the way it only did when something was worse than expected. "Russell," he said. "There are 11 of them." 11 was a number I could not put down. Everett lifted the bag from the floor, with both hands, holding it, the way you carry something you already know is significant, and set it on the kitchen table beneath the overhead light. He looked at me across the surface, then pulled out his phone and made a call that lasted less than 2 minutes. When he hung up, his expression had shifted into something focused and purposeful. "There is someone I need here tonight," he said. "She will be here inside the hour." "Who?" I asked. "Serena Voss. We worked financial crimes together for 6 years before I retired. She stayed on, made detective 3 years ago. She is one of the sharpest investigators they have, and if those documents are what I think they are, she needs to examine them before we do anything else." I pulled out a chair and sat down across from the bag. Through the outer layer of plastic, I could make out the edges of folded papers, the corner of what appeared to be a standard bank letterhead. My name, Russell Mercer, was visible on at least 2 of the sheets from where I sat. My name on documents I had never seen in my life. The bruising along my rib cage had settled into a dull, spreading ache. I pressed one hand flat against the tabletop and breathed through it. Serena Voss arrived at 20 minutes past midnight. She looked to be in her late 30s, compact and unhesitating, in the particular way that develops when your work teaches you that uncertainty is expensive. She had an evidence kit over one shoulder, wore a dark jacket over civilian clothes, and moved into the kitchen doorway with the ease of someone accustomed to entering rooms that needed to be understood quickly. She took in the visible damage through the open bedroom doorway, the overturned drawers, the gouged flooring, the battered safe lying at an angle against the far wall, and then directed her attention to the table. "Walk me through what you know," she said. Everett explained the gap in the wall behind the safe, the letter from Theodore, the handwritten list of document types. Serena listened without interrupting, head tilted slightly, organizing what she was hearing into categories, even as he spoke. When he finished, she pulled on a pair of nitrile gloves, opened the bag, and began going through the contents, 1 page at a time. I watched her face carefully. She gave away very little. But her pace slowed as she worked deeper into the stack, and by the 6th document, the line of her jaw had tightened in a way she did not seem aware of. "Mr. Mercer." She turned one of the sheets toward me, a loan agreement from First National Bank of Savannah dated 22 months ago. "Is this your signature?" I looked at it. I have signed my name under Russell Mercer for 67 years. The signature on the document was close enough that a distracted loan officer might not have questioned it. But it was wrong in the way that your own face is wrong when you see it mirrored unexpectedly. "No," I said. "That is not my signature." "Any part of it?" "No." She set it aside and continued. By the time she had laid all 11 pages flat across the kitchen table, the surface had become something that resembled the beginning of a criminal case. 3 personal loan agreements from 3 separate financial institutions in the Savannah area, 2 credit card account applications, 6 additional records related to property assessments and what appeared to be modifications to my homeowner's insurance policy, all bearing versions of my signature that were plausible from a distance and wrong up close. "Someone has been using your identity to build debt," Serena said. She did not wrap it in gentler language, which I was grateful for. 3 personal loans totaling just under $193,000. 2 credit accounts bringing the total to approximately $218,000. And these property documents suggest someone was working to add themselves as a beneficiary on your homeowner's insurance. She looked up from the table and held my eyes. "This was not improvised, Mr. Mercer. Someone constructed this methodically over 3 years. $218,000. The number settled into the space behind my sternum and sat there with the weight of something that had been true for a long time without my knowledge. A man with more options would have run. But Garrett Price had already run out of places to go. The debt followed addresses, and he understood that. What he had left was not a plan built on confidence. It was a plan built on the particular desperation of someone who has calculated that there is only one move remaining and has stopped being able to imagine the consequences of it going wrong. 3 years. All while I was going to church Sunday mornings, leaving the back door unlocked for the plumber, who never needed a key, thinking the most difficult problem in my life was a sycamore tree that had started leaning toward the property line. "There is something else." Serena turned the second credit card application face up and pointed to a handwritten notation in the lower margin, a name and an address listed as the secondary mailing contact for account correspondence. "Owen Daly. Do you know this person?" I looked at the name. "Never heard of him." "I will find him," she said. Not a promise, a statement of schedule. For the next 40 minutes, Everett helped me work through the account numbers while Serena photographed and logged each document individually before placing it into its own evidence sleeve. I made 4 phone calls, 2 to bank fraud departments, 2 to credit reporting agencies initiating formal dispute procedures, and requesting immediate holds on every account I had not opened. My voice stayed steadier than I expected throughout all of it. I was running on something beyond adrenaline by then, something closer to the particular kind of cold that comes when you stop being surprised by a situation and start managing it. It was close to 2 in the morning when I bent down to retrieve something from beneath the edge of the dresser. A photograph face down that had slid into the gap between the furniture and the wall during the search. I picked it up and turned it over. Marlene at around 8 years old, standing in the backyard of this house, holding a melting chocolate ice cream cone in both hands, laughing at something behind the camera with the uninhibited whole-face laugh of a child who has not yet learned to be careful with her joy. I had taken that photograph. I remembered the exact afternoon it was taken, a July Sunday too hot, the kind of day you stay in the yard because the car is too warm to bother with. My chest contracted hard around something I did not have a name for. I placed the photograph face down on the dresser surface and walked back to the kitchen without speaking. My phone lit up on the counter. Unknown number. A text message in 6 words. "Drop this now or I will." Serena looked up from across the table. I turned the screen toward her without commentary. "Screenshot that immediately," she said. "Under Georgia law that constitutes criminal threatening. It is a chargeable offense and it is now part of this file." She was already writing in her log. "Do not respond. Do not acknowledge it." I took the screenshot. Outside the kitchen window, at the far end of the block, a pair of headlights moved at the crawling pace of a vehicle with no reason to drive that slowly at that hour. The ribs woke me before the light did. I had been lying on Everett's couch with a throw pillow wedged under my left side, and somewhere around 4 in the morning, I shifted without thinking, and the bruising across my rib cage reminded me immediately, and in very specific terms, of everything that had happened in the past 18 hours. I lay without moving after that. Savannah in the early hours has a quality that does not exist at any other time. The birds wake up before the city does, and in the stretch between 4:30 and sunrise you can hear the old oaks moving on the street outside without any traffic to compete with them. I did not get up until I smelled coffee from the kitchen. Everett was already at the table, with his mug and a notepad covered in his handwriting. The tight, orderly print of a man who had spent 30 years organizing information for a living. He looked up when I came in, pushed the second mug in my direction, and let me get 3 good sips in before he said anything. That had always been one of the things about Everett that I valued most. He understood when a man needed a few minutes to be a person before becoming a problem to be solved. Serena called at 6, he said. There is a development. Good or bad, Garrett Price filed a police report last night. He said it the way he said most difficult things, without build-up, without softening. He is claiming that you attacked him yesterday at your house. He is also alleging that you have been exhibiting signs of his exact phrasing, mental deterioration, and that you are not competent to manage your own financial affairs. I set the mug down. Something sharp and hot moved through my chest and stayed there. He is saying that I attacked him, I said. The man who put a handprint bruise on my face is telling the police that I attacked him. Yes. Everett's voice was level, but something behind it was running very low on patience. Serena considers it a preemptive maneuver. He is trying to get his account of yesterday onto the record before anyone else's gets there first. The problem for him is that Memorial Health Savannah already has yours. Patricia Webb's documentation photographs, examination notes, the full written record was filed and signed before he ever walked into that precinct. A verbal counterclaim made 12 hours after the fact cannot undo what a licensed medical professional already put in writing and signed her name to. I breathed through the anger carefully, the way you breathe through physical pain when you cannot make it stop. Can he be charged for filing a false report? Georgia law makes it a criminal offense misdemeanor at minimum, potentially more depending on what he claimed and his intent in claiming it. Serena is looking at it. But more important than the charge is what the report tells us about where Garrett's head is right now. Russell, a man who does something and has no fear of consequences, does not run to the police at 10 o'clock at night to get ahead of the story. He does that when he is frightened. I thought about that for a moment. Then I thought about the photograph Garrett had sent to my phone, 6 words, unknown number. Then I thought about the headlights moving slowly past the window at 2 in the morning. There is something else, I said. You started to tell me something last night before Serena arrived. You stopped yourself. Everett looked at his notepad, then at me. 6 weeks ago, Garrett came to me asking to borrow $15,000. Short-term investment, he said. He was vague in the particular way people are vague when the real reason is something they cannot say out loud. He paused. I did not give him the money, but something about the conversation stayed with me, the timing of it, the amount, the fact that he came to me instead of a bank. So I hired a private investigator. He held up a hand before I could react. I know. I should have told you. I did not tell you because I was not yet certain of anything, and putting an unconfirmed suspicion in front of you would have changed how you behaved around him. That could not happen. 32 years of friendship. 6 weeks of this alone and not one word. What did the investigator find? I asked. My voice came out steadier than my hands felt under the table. 3 separate meetings at the same location on Whitaker Street. Each time Garrett met with a man who could not be immediately identified. Each time an envelope exchanged hands. Everett slid a printed photograph across the table taken from distance, slightly grainy. Garrett in profile at a small table. A second man across from him, face partially turned, extending a thick envelope. I sent this to Serena before you woke up. I looked at the photograph for a long moment. The man across from Garrett was heavy-set, middle-aged, wearing a light jacket. Nothing about him was immediately distinctive. I did not recognize him. I pushed back from the table and said I needed an hour. Sacred Heart Catholic Church on Abercorn Street was a 15-minute drive from Everett's neighborhood. I had attended services there for 23 years. Father Raymond Stull had been the parish priest for 16 of those years, a sturdy, unhurried man in his mid-60s who possessed the rarest of pastoral gifts, the ability to listen without immediately wanting to fix what he heard. He was working along the low stone wall of the side garden when I came through the gate, cutting back the dead growth from a row of white gardenias. He looked up, took in the bruising on my face without making a scene of it, and gestured toward the wooden bench along the wall. We sat. Sunlight through the oak canopy, mockingbirds in the upper branches, the distant sound of Abercorn Street doing its ordinary morning business. Then Father Stull turned toward me with that level, waiting expression of his, not pushing, just open. I had planned to explain the situation from the beginning. The check, the bank. Theodore's letter, the 11 documents. But what came out of my mouth instead was something I had not planned to say at all, and my voice cracked through the middle of it before I could stop it. She used to bring me coffee every Sunday morning, Raymond, before the service, every week for years without fail. My throat was pulling tight in a way that made the next words difficult. I cannot remember when she stopped. And that might be the part of all of this that I am least able to hold on to, that I didn't notice when she stopped. Father Stull let that settle in the air for a moment. Then he spoke without any preamble. Some people choose who they become, Russell. They make that choice alone when no one is watching, when no one is asking them to account for it. That choice was never yours to make for her. A pause. And the day she stopped bringing coffee was not the day you failed her. She had already made her decision long before that. My eyes burned so hard I had to press the back of my hand against them. I breathed through my nose 3 times until the sharpest of it passed. When I walked back to Everett's truck in the parking lot, he was standing by the driver's door, phone in hand. He looked at my face, then looked away briefly in the particular way of a man giving another man a second to collect himself. Serena identified the man in the photograph, he said. And Russell, the number that came up with his name, is going to explain a great deal about why Garrett Price is so desperate. Serena told us later that she had Owen Daly in a chair at Habersham Street Station by early afternoon. I say it that quickly because that is how quickly she moved. Between the parking lot of Sacred Heart Church and the moment Everett and I walked back through his front door, she had already pulled the name from the loan document, traced it to an address in the Midtown district, made contact, and arranged a voluntary interview. No warrant required. Owen Daly came in on his own because no one had told him yet that what he knew was significant. She arrived at Everett's house an hour later with a folder and a cup of coffee that had gone cold during the drive. She sat across from both of us at the kitchen table and covered the essential facts without preamble. Owen Daly is 34 years old, she said. He works dispatch for a freight company near the port. He has known Garrett Price for approximately 2 years through a shared social circle, bar nights, occasional gatherings. He considers them friendly acquaintances, not close friends. She glanced at the folder. He answered every question openly. He had no idea that describing his relationship with Garrett was going to serve any investigative purpose. That is the advantage of voluntary questioning. People tell the truth because they have not yet calculated what the truth costs. What did it cost Garrett? I asked. Serena looked up. Garrett Price is carrying a debt of $340,000 to an organized gambling operation working out of several locations along the coastal Georgia corridor. High-stakes private card games, invitation only, organized by people whose primary business is collecting what they are owed through means that do not involve a courtroom. She let that land before continuing. The debt has accumulated over approximately 2.5 years. The repayment deadline, as Owen Daly understood it, From a direct conversation with Garrett 6 weeks ago falls 18 days from today. The kitchen felt like the air had been removed from it. What happens at 18 days? Everett asked. His voice was very even. Daly did not specify. He did not have to. Serena closed the folder. What matters is that Garrett told him clearly that he understood the stakes. So, I pressed both palms flat against the tabletop and looked at the grain of the wood. $340,000. Not greed in the ordinary understanding of the word. This was not a man who wanted a larger house or a better car. This was a man running from something that would not stop running after him. That realization did not make me feel anything like sympathy. It made my chest go cold in a way that sympathy is not capable of producing. There is something else, Serena said. She looked at me with the directness I had come to expect from her. Daly recalled a specific conversation from approximately 3 weeks ago at the same location on Whitaker Street, where the investigator's photograph was taken. He remembered the words clearly enough to repeat them. Garrett said, "The old man's house in Ardsley Park alone is worth $500,000 on a slow day. One way or another, that money is coming to us." The sentence sat between the three of us like an object that had been set down on the table. "He said us," I said. "He said us," Serena confirmed. Daly assumed he was referring to himself and Marlene. She stayed another 30 minutes. More documents, a formal victim statement expanding the incident report from the previous day, a supplementary fraud declaration covering the additional accounts identified overnight, and a written authorization permitting her department to subpoena records from the 3 lending institutions. I read every line of each one before I signed it. After the past 48 hours, I had developed a very particular relationship with the act of putting my name on paper. After she left, the afternoon went heavy and slow. Everett heated something from the stove and put it in front of me without announcing what it was, and I ate it without much attention. My ribs had settled into a dull background complaint that I had mostly learned to breathe around. Outside, a neighbor's dog was barking at something several houses down, then stopping, then starting again. It was close to 7 when Everett came in from the hallway, carrying a box sealed with packing tape, my name written on the side in Marlene's handwriting. He set it on the table and did not explain where it had come from or why he had saved it. He simply put it down in front of me. I looked at it for a moment. Then I pulled the tape loose and opened the top. Inside, wrapped in tissue paper that had kept them together for years, a stack of birthday cards held by a rubber band. I slipped the band off and spread them across the table. 23 of them. One for every year from the time she had been old enough to hold a crayon. I went through them in order from the first, a child's drawing of something that might have been a horse with "Happy Birthday, Daddy" printed in enormous, unsteady letters across the top through the years, watching her handwriting grow from printed blocks to cursive to the composed adult script of the most recent one. That one was dated 2 years ago. A plain store-bought card, one handwritten line inside, "You are the best father I know. Always." I read that line twice. Then I placed the card face down. Last year there had been nothing. No card, no call, no message of any kind. I had noticed at the time, of course, I had noticed, and I had built a small, careful explanation for it, the way a person builds something they need to be true. She was overwhelmed. She had meant to send it. There would be one next year. My chest felt like something inside it was being squeezed out slowly, hand over hand. I sat with all 23 cards in front of me and felt everything they added up to and everything the missing one meant. And I held myself together, and holding myself together at that particular moment cost me more than breaking down would have. Everett came back in at some point and stopped moving when he saw the cards spread across the table. He refilled my water glass and set it beside my hand. The right thing done without needing to be asked. 18 days, I said, and he knows I will not hand him a single dollar voluntarily. Which means he will not use all 18 of them, Everett said. We were still at the table at 2 in the morning when the motion alert came through on his phone. He pulled it up, looked at the screen, and turned it toward me, at the far end of his block engine idling headlights off a dark sedan with no business being parked there at that hour. He is not watching just your house anymore, Everett said, and his voice had gone to the place it went when he was already calculating the next step. There are 2 kinds of traps. The first kind uses force, a snare, something that holds by strength alone, that works whether or not the target understands what is happening. The second kind uses what the target has already decided they want. It works only if they walk into it themselves. The Monday morning I returned to my house on Abercorn Street for the first time in 5 days, I understood with absolute clarity which kind we were building, and I understood exactly what it required of me. The recording from the hotel room had given us Saturday. Garrett had named the night himself in my own living room, into a device he never knew was listening. That was the window. Everything that followed was built inside it. The house still held evidence of what had been done to it. The flooring in the bedroom was gouged where the safe had been dragged and struck. The closet doors hung slightly crooked from being thrown open and grabbed. The pale square on the wall where the old safe had stood for 20 years looked like an absence that had not yet decided what to become. I had cleaned the worst of the surface debris over the weekend, but I had not replaced the safe, had not rearranged the furniture, had not done anything that might suggest to someone watching from outside that the conditions inside had fundamentally changed. Everett arrived at 7 in the morning, carrying a canvas bag and enough equipment to make the house remember everything that happened inside it. Before he finished, I asked him about the locks. Changing them was the obvious move, the first thing any man should do after what had happened inside this house. Everett looked at me for a moment and then said, "If the locks are changed, she notices the moment she tries the key. She calls Garrett. Garrett adjusts. We lose everything we have built." He went back to the camera at the bookshelf. "Leave the locks. The key is part of the trap." He installed 6 cameras over the next 2 hours without rushing any of it, 4 inside, 2, covering the exterior. Each one was tested against the laptop feed before he moved to the next angles, checked and adjusted until he was satisfied nothing would be missed. The living room device went into the housing of the bookshelf clock, flush with the face indistinguishable from 3 feet away. The audio pickup went inside the base of the floor lamp in the center of the room. "If anyone speaks in here," Everett said, stepping back to check the lamp's line to the ceiling, "we will have every word." "They have to come in first," I said. He looked at me steadily. "You know what you need to do." I did. I had been turning it over since the night before. The trap required bait, and the only bait that would bring Garrett and Marlene through that door was the sight of a man who was faltering, a father who was old and tired and starting to question whether the fight was worth its cost, someone who might still be reachable if they came at him carefully and said the right things, to make them believe that I had to call my daughter. Doris Kemper came over around 10, a dish towel still over one shoulder from the kitchen she had interrupted. I told her what I needed, no details, only that if any neighbor asked, she should mention that Russell had seemed low this week, worn down, not quite himself. She had lived next door for 18 years. She looked at me for a moment with those sharp, perceptive eyes of hers, and then she said, "Half the block will hear it before supper." She said it like a woman who knows exactly how neighborhoods work, and then she went back to her kitchen. I made the call at 10:30. My hands were entirely steady. My throat was not. Marlene answered on the second ring. "Daddy." Her voice adjusted itself in real time, a warmth that bloomed slightly too fast, the way a light comes on when a switch is hit. "I've been thinking about you so much. Are you all right?" "I don't know," I said. I let my voice carry exactly what it actually carried: the weight of the past week, the ache behind my eye, the thing that had been sitting in my chest since I read the birthday cards. I did not exaggerate any of it. I only stopped editing it. I've been sitting in this house thinking about whether I've been handling everything the right way. I'm not sure I have. I don't want things between us to end the way they seem to be ending. 3 seconds of quiet on her end. Then I can come this afternoon. Would that help? Yes, I said. That would help. I put the phone down and stood at the kitchen sink with both hands on the edge of the counter looking at the drain. My jaw ached from the effort of keeping my voice level. Behind me, I heard Everett come quietly to the doorway. She's calling Garrett right now, I said before he could speak. I know, he said. I'll monitor the feed remotely from the truck down the block. You know what to do. Marlene arrived at 2 in the afternoon, in a light dress, carrying a container of soup, and wearing an expression she had clearly decided on during the drive over. She hugged me in the doorway, both arms around my shoulders, the full weight of it, and when she pulled back, she studied my face with her brows drawn together in the practiced manner of deep concern. You look exhausted, she said softly. I am, I told her. At least that part needed no performance. We sat in the living room for close to an hour. She asked whether I was eating, whether my ribs had been looked at again, whether I was sleeping. I answered in the way of a man who has been awake too many nights, with too many thoughts for company. She spoke gently, warmly, and with the consistency of someone who had rehearsed the register of the conversation. When she reached over and touched my hand, her fingers were cool, and her expression did not shift by a single degree. My eyelids began to drop. I let them close. What I did was lower my chin slowly toward my chest and breathe with the long, shallow rhythm of sleep while keeping the thinnest gap between my eyelashes. Enough to register movement. Nothing more. Marlene waited perhaps 80 seconds after my breathing changed. Then she rose from the chair. She moved to the center of the living room and stood still. What she did next was not something a grieving daughter does while her father sleeps in the chair beside her. She turned in a slow, deliberate circle, her eyes moving from the bookshelf to the side table to the framed photographs, to the height of the ceiling and back again. Methodical, thorough. The way a person moves through a room, they are calculating, not visiting. She paused at the second shelf of the bookcase where a framed photograph of Theodore and me sat in front of a row of books taken the summer before he got sick, both of us squinting against the sun. She looked at it for 4 full seconds, and her face did something I could not quite read through my narrowed eyelids. Then she moved toward the hallway. I heard the first drawer open, very quietly. The careful sound of someone who has done this before and knows how not to be heard. She was back in her chair before 3 minutes had passed, smoothing the front of her dress with both hands. When I shifted and lifted my head with a slow blink, she was looking at her phone with a small and sympathetic expression already in place. I'm sorry, I said. I didn't mean to fall asleep. Please don't apologize. She squeezed my hand. You need rest. I'll come back whenever you need me. Any time at all. After her taillights disappeared at the corner, I stood at the front window for a moment, with one hand against the frame. My chest was working through something complicated, and I did not examine it closely. Everett came in from the back hallway with the laptop and turned the screen toward me without comment. I watched 30 seconds of footage, Marlene standing in the center of my living room, turning a slow and deliberate circle, her eyes moving from corner to corner, to the ceiling as though she was counting everything in it. At 11 minutes past midnight, the camera alert came through. Everett looked at the screen. Then he held it toward me, 2 shadows moving in single file through the back gate, unhurried and low. The back door opening from the inside, Marlene's spare key, the one a daughter keeps to her childhood home and never thinks to return. Both figures stepping into the dark of the house they believed was empty. Before I play you what those cameras recorded inside that house that night, comment the number 8 below to let me know you're still here. At 11 minutes past midnight, the motion alert came through on Everett's phone. 2 figures. Back gate. Single file. Just a note. The chapters ahead contain some fictional elements woven in for storytelling purposes. If that's not for you, this is a good place to step away, and I respect that completely. The Savannah Marriott on Bay Street charged $94 a night for a room that looked out over the river. Room 412 was not large, a desk by the window. 2 chairs pulled close, the walls and carpet, the particular shade of neutral that every hotel uses to ensure its rooms are forgotten the moment you check out. After Marlene's taillights disappeared that afternoon, Everett and I had driven directly here, far enough from Abercorn Street, that no one watching the house would connect us to it, close enough that the camera feed ran clean across the distance. We had arrived at 6 in the evening, with Everett's laptop, and a bag of equipment I had not asked him to itemize. By 7, the camera feed was running clean across 6 split panels on the screen. The front exterior, the back gate, the living room, the hallway, the kitchen, the upper landing. The Savannah River moved below the window in the dark, slow, indifferent traffic on the water, the far bank blurred in the June humidity. We ordered food from the hotel restaurant and ate without paying much attention to what it was. I sat with my eyes on the screen and thought about Marlene turning in that slow, deliberate circle in my living room that afternoon. The way her gaze had moved from corner to ceiling, as if she was conducting an inventory. I had watched that footage 3 times in the truck before we checked in, and it had not become easier to watch. At 11 minutes past midnight, the back gate panel shifted. Everett's hand moved to the laptop so fast he nearly knocked it sideways. On the panel, barely visible in the ambient light, bleeding from the neighboring property, 2 figures in dark clothing moved in single file along the rear path, heads low, unhurried in the way people move when they are certain they are alone. The back door opened from inside. Both figures disappeared into the house. For 30 seconds, the living room panel held nothing but shadows. Then the under-cabinet light in the kitchen came on, not the overhead, just the low strip above the counter that I kept on a dimmer. Enough light to move by. Not enough to show through the front windows. Garrett had thought about that. The audio pickup and the base of the floor lamp caught the room from that point forward with no distortion at all. Garrett's voice came through the laptop speaker first, lower than his normal register, the version he used when he was not performing confidence but simply possessing it. She believed every word. That visit today put her exactly where we needed her. Marlene a few feet closer to the lamp's pickup. He looked genuinely bad, Garrett. The bruise on his face, the way he was breathing, maybe he's not. No pause. No flexibility in it. He's doing the same thing we're doing, which means we have run out of time to be careful. A chair moved. Footsteps, Garrett pacing irregular, the sound of a man whose mind was running faster than his body. Saturday, he said. We do it Saturday night. In room 412, Everett opened the recording application with 2 keystrokes and hit capture. His face had gone into the focused, stone-still expression of a man in his professional mode. Marlene's voice quieter now. Which Saturday? This one. 4 days from tonight. The footsteps paused. The dwelling insurance policy has been updated. Marlene Price is listed as the secondary beneficiary on the primary coverage. I had that changed 8 months ago. It processed without any flag. The words hit me in the sternum like something blunt. 8 months. While I had been living in that house, going to church, maintaining the yard, someone had been inside my financial life making changes I knew nothing about. My jaw clamped down hard, and I pressed one hand flat against the desk to keep the rest of me from reacting visibly. If the house burns, Garrett continued, The payout on the dwelling and contents combined comes to just under $450,000. With the title transfer through inheritance, it clears everything, Marlene. Everything we owe, everything we've been carrying, all of it. On the living room panel, Marlene's silhouette stood with her arms folded across her chest. She was not moving toward the door. "And if he's inside," she said, and her voice had dropped to something that barely carried through the speaker, "when it starts, then probate opens automatically," Garrett said. "No will on file, she is next of kin, and I have already spoken to someone who handles these things quickly. The estate clears in weeks. We control everything before any bank has time to move against it." My lungs stopped cooperating. I became very specifically aware of the surface under my palm, the texture of the desk laminate, the slight give at the edge, because focusing on the physical was the only thing keeping the rest of me in the chair. Beside me, Everett's breathing had slowed to something deliberate and controlled. Then Marlene spoke again. 8 words, and they came through the laptop speaker with a clarity that felt like being spoken to directly from 3 inches away. "Will it look like an accident?" Something inside my chest closed around itself hard, like a hand making a fist. I did not make a sound. I could feel my heartbeat in the bruise on my cheekbone. Garrett answered the way a man answers a question he has already solved. "Old house, old wiring. A man who lived alone and didn't keep up with maintenance. The fire marshal closes those cases in 48 hours. Nobody looks twice." More footsteps. He was moving toward the door. "Saturday night," he said. "We are done waiting." Everett reached across and pressed the mute button on the laptop speaker, not stopping the recording, which continued running without interruption, but removing their voices from the room for a moment. He looked at me. I looked at the screen. Marlene had not moved from the center of my living room. I pressed both hands down on the desk, breathed through my nose until my chest loosened by a fraction, and then I straightened in the chair. "That is everything a prosecutor needs," Everett said. He said it exactly the way it needed to be said, without decoration, without emphasis, just the fact of it. He saved the audio file to the laptop hard drive. He transferred a copy to an external drive he had brought specifically for this purpose. He uploaded a 3rd copy to a cloud account, waited for the confirmation, and then closed the application. 3 copies. 4 words that had just made every remaining decision for us. At 2:14 in the morning, the back gate panel showed both figures leaving in the same single-file line they had arrived in. The house went dark. The river moved outside the window. Everett closed the laptop and looked at me across the desk. "We have until Saturday," he said. "Saturday morning in Savannah. In late June arrives before you have made peace with it. The humidity building before the sun has cleared the rooftops. The Spanish moss hanging without any movement. In the absence of wind, the birds ahead of everything, and already going about their business, while the street below is still half belonging to the night before." I had been sitting at the window in Everett's spare room for more than an hour, before the sky went fully light, watching a neighborhood wake up that had no idea what this particular Saturday was going to become. I had slept perhaps 90 minutes. That was sufficient. There was nothing useful to do with more. Everett was dressed when I came out, jacket on, laptop bag over one shoulder, the external drive already in his pocket. He moved through the kitchen with the focused economy of a man who had been preparing himself for this kind of morning for the better part of a career. "Serena is meeting me at Habersham Street at 7, he said. "She's bringing the prosecutor." "Who is the prosecutor?" "Rosalind Farr, Assistant District Attorney. She handles the serious cases. Serena's worked with her before and says she is exactly who you want holding this when it goes to court. She doesn't reach for a deal when she doesn't have to, and with what we have, she won't have to." He looked at me from the doorway. "I'll be back before noon. Don't put yourself in front of Garrett Price today under any circumstances." He left. I made coffee and sat at the kitchen table and went through the recording in my memory, the way you go through something that has permanently changed what you know carefully from the beginning without skipping the parts that are hardest to hold. At 11 in the morning, Everett called from the truck. Farr listened to this full recording twice, he said. First play, not a word. She had Serena start it again from the beginning before she said anything. A brief pause. She's filing 2 applications. Arrest warrants for both Garrett and Marlene Price, conspiracy to commit first-degree murder, and conspiracy to commit arson of an occupied dwelling. And search warrants for their home address, both registered vehicles and their financial accounts. She explained it this way: the arrest warrants give us the right to take them into custody immediately. The search warrants give us the right to seize everything before they can reach it. Why not move today? I asked. Because if we take Garrett and Marlene isn't with him, she destroys everything she can touch and has an attorney on the phone before we get to her address. Same problem in reverse. Farr wants both in custody at the same moment, no call between them, no warning, no time to coordinate. She's submitting the applications to the on-call judge this afternoon. Warrants should be approved by 9 tonight. The moment they clear, Serena positions plainclothes units on both approach routes. They hold until she has visual confirmation on both Garrett and Marlene simultaneously, no move until then. One without the other, and we lose the window. A judge works on a Saturday, I asked. A judge is on call every day for violent crime probable cause. A recording of someone planning to burn a man alive with his house is not something that waits until Monday morning. His voice stayed level, but something underneath it had weight. After 9, we wait for Serena to confirm the location of both of them. When we have that, she moves. I said thank you and hung up and held the phone in my hand for a moment. Rosalind Farr. 2 full plays of the recording before a single word. I found that I was glad, in a specific and solid way, that she was the one who would be standing between that recording and a jury. I drove to Sacred Heart just before noon. The garden was in full sun, the gardenias along the low stone wall heavy with the June humidity, their petals almost translucent in the heat. Father Raymond Stoll was working along the iron gate on the south side, trimming growth that had come up through the ironwork. He looked up when he heard the gate latch, read whatever he read in my face and posture, and moved to the bench without any preamble. We sat in full sun. The street beyond the gate carried its ordinary Saturday sounds. You came to say something before tonight, Father Stoll said. It was not a question. I wrote a letter to Theodore last night, I said. I don't know entirely what I was trying to tell him. I wrote it anyway. I looked at the gardenias. They were the same white they were every June. I told him I understood what he did and why he did it alone. That I wished I had known sooner so I could have thanked him while it still meant something. I stopped for a moment, and I told him I was going to be all right. I wanted him to have that wherever he is. Father Stoll sat with that in the heat for a long moment, not searching for a response, but letting what I had said find its proper place before he answered. You didn't need to write it for him, he said finally. You wrote it for yourself, so you could say it and mean it before the rest of this begins. He paused. Theodore would agree. I left 20 minutes later and drove back through the neighborhood. Ardsley Park on a Saturday afternoon looked as it always had: lawnmowers, a child learning to ride a bicycle, the ordinary unhurried pace of a residential street that did not know it had a story in it. Calvin Draper was on his front porch when I passed his house across the street. He was 63 years old, a retired high school biology teacher with 14 years on this block, and the particular alert quality of someone who had spent 3 decades paying attention to rooms full of people. He raised one hand in the slow, deliberate wave that was his usual greeting. I rolled down the window. Calvin, heard it's been a rough stretch, he said, in the way neighbors acknowledge things without pressing. It has been, I said, getting cleaner, he nodded. You need anything, you know where I am. I do, I said. I appreciate it. I spent the afternoon at Everett's kitchen table with a legal pad. The victim impact statement I had been composing in my head for 10 days finally went onto paper, all of it in the order it had happened, written slowly and without the dramatic shaping that grief sometimes puts on things. I crossed out lines that sounded like performance and rewrote them until they were only accurate. When I finished, I read it once, folded it into an envelope, and addressed it to Margaret Holloway. The letter to Theodore went into a separate envelope. I handed it to Everett after dinner. He looked at it and did not ask what was in it. He put it in his inside jacket pocket where it would stay until it was needed or it wasn't. At 11 minutes past 11 in the evening, the rear exterior camera sent an alert. Everett pulled up the notification and turned the phone toward me. Along the back fence line of the Ardsley Park property, moving at a slow and deliberate pace with his head down, a figure in a dark jacket. Stopping at the corner of the rear outbuilding, studying the structure. Garrett Price, 2 hours and 40 minutes ahead of what he had told Marlene was Saturday night. He had told Marlene 2 in the morning late enough that the block would be silent early enough that darkness still had hours left. He had come early because something had changed in his calculation, and whatever it was, it had not made him more patient. The warrants cleared at 9, Everett said. His voice had gone to its lowest register. Serena has both of them. She is coordinating right now. He looked at me with the expression of a man who has been waiting for a very long time and has just watched the clock run out. Russell, he is not going to wait until midnight. The fire began at 11:47. I know the exact time because Everett spoke it out loud. The moment the first orange light appeared in the rear upper window of my house, a detective's habit naming facts to fix them in place. We had moved the truck 2 blocks east from the original positions, parked in the ordinary shadow of a residential street at midnight. 2 men in a vehicle that could have been left there for any number of unremarkable reasons. I had been watching the house for 36 minutes by then. My coffee cup from earlier in the evening was still in the cup holder, completely cold, and I had been turning it between my palms without drinking from it because it gave my hands somewhere to be. The light in the rear window was small at first, the kind of orange glow that could pass for a lamp left on if you were not looking for it. But it was in a room that had no lamp positioned anywhere near that window, and it was moving in the way that lamps do not move. Within 4 minutes, it had spread along the roofline of the back outbuilding and was pushing its reflection into the glass. Everett had his phone up before the light reached the main structure. "It started," he said. 1 sentence, and then he was listening. On the other end of that call, Serena Voss already had everything she needed. Across the street, the house I had lived in for 40 years began to come apart at its edges. There is no composed language for watching that happen. The back end of the property went first the old storage structure, where I had kept 30 years of tools and seasonal things, and the belongings a person accumulates without noticing. Then the rear kitchen wall caught. Later, the fire marshal's report would describe a pattern of accelerant applied deliberately to the interior base of the rear wall, language that left no ambiguity about what it was and who had put it there. The orange glow in the upper windows shifted from something contained to something that was no longer asking permission. The first call to 911 came from Calvin Draper. I could not hear the call from across the street, but I saw his front porch light come on at 3 minutes past midnight, and a moment later he was at the edge of his front steps in a bathrobe with his phone pressed to his ear and his free hand pointing at my house as though the dispatcher required a specific direction. After he ended the call, he did not go back inside. He stood at the edge of his property with his arms at his sides and watched something he had no power to stop, and that particular helplessness was visible even from 30 yards away. The neighbors emerged one by one the way they always do when a night produces something they weren't prepared for, porch lights coming on along the block. In sequence, figures appearing in doorways. The low and unintelligible sound of people gathering at the edges of something terrible. The light from the first fire truck arrived from the direction of Gaston Street, before the truck itself was visible, throwing red and blue against the old oaks in a way that made the entire block look like something that was happening to someone else. I watched all of it from inside the truck, and I did not move. The grief that comes from watching your home burn has a specific physical address. It starts somewhere behind the sternum and radiates outward until it reaches your hands, your jaw, the backs of your eyes. It does not arrive with sound. It settles into the body like something that has decided to stay permanently, and it coexists with everything else you are feeling at the same moment. The cold determination, the calculated waiting in a way that is entirely possible and entirely terrible. I had built a garden in that backyard 31 years ago. I had replaced the front porch railing the summer Marlene turned 12. I had repainted the kitchen ceiling 3 times because I could never get the white exactly right, and each time I convinced myself that one more attempt would settle it. The house had been wrong and expensive and impractical in the particular ways that the houses you genuinely love are always wrong and expensive and impractical. And now it was producing a column of black smoke, visible from 3 blocks away, while a fire marshal's report waited to be written somewhere in the future. I pressed both hands flat against my thighs and kept my breathing even. At 22 minutes past midnight, a figure appeared at the near end of the block, moving at a pace slightly too deliberate for someone who did not yet know what she was approaching. Marlene Price. She had a jacket thrown over what appeared to be the same clothing from earlier, the jacket of someone who dressed quickly because they were supposed to have been asleep and had been called. She stopped at the outer edge of the gathered neighbors, looked at the fire, and then let her shoulders drop forward in a way that involved her entire body. From the truck, I watched her move into the crowd. Doris Kemper found her first. Doris had been in her front yard since the first truck arrived, standing in her house slippers, with both hands pressed flat against her mouth, watching the house beside hers lose its back half to something she could not name yet. When she saw Marlene, she crossed the distance between them immediately and wrapped both arms around her, the way a person does when they believe wholeheartedly that the person they are holding is in pain. Marlene pressed her face into Doris's shoulder. I watched the shape of them together, from inside the truck, from across the street, through glass. I could not hear a single word of what passed between them. But I watched Doris pull back, take Marlene by both shoulders at arm's length, and ask her something directly short, one breath, the kind of question that fits inside a moment of crisis. And I watched Marlene from 30 yards away through the windshield nod her head once. One slow, certain nod. I did not know yet what the words were. But I understood what the nod had confirmed, and my chest tightened around that understanding so hard I had to force my next breath. Everett lowered his phone and looked across the cab at me. Serena has visual on both of them. Garrett is coming back on the north approach on foot. He checked his watch. She is moving in 90 seconds. He reached across and put his hand on my shoulder, firm, brief, the grip of a man making a statement that does not require language. Then he looked at me. Ready? I looked at the fire one last time. The sycamore at the corner of the lot had taken light in its lower branches. The old kitchen window was gone entirely. 40 years of mornings in that house, and every one of them was burning right now, and not one of them could be recovered. I put my hand on the door. Before I tell you what happened the night of the fire drop, still here in the comments right now. Because at 11:47 that night, everything came down to one question. Would they find an empty house or a man who had been waiting for them all along? A reminder of portions of this story include fictional elements crafted for narrative and educational purposes. If you'd prefer to step away before this next chapter, now is a good moment to do so. I stepped out of the truck at 12:17 in the morning with the coffee cup in my right hand. The cup had been cold since 9 o'clock. I had picked it up from the cup holder when Everett asked the question, and my hand had simply not returned it. Some part of me understood what I was doing, that crossing that street at that hour in the direction of a burning house and a gathered crowd, and 40 years of my life going to carbon and smoke, carrying an ordinary cold coffee cup, was not the incidental detail it appeared to be. It was the whole point. I crossed at an even pace, not hurried, not careful, the pace of a man walking somewhere he intends to arrive. I heard Doris Kemper before I reached the center line. Her voice came out ahead of her body, sharp, involuntary, the sound a person produces when the information arrives before the response is ready. Russell. And then, as the distance between us closed and the firelight reached my face and the fact of me became undeniable, "Oh my God, Russell, you're—" The crowd shifted the way crowds do when 30 people process the same unexpected fact simultaneously. Heads turning, the low sound of voices dropping and reassembling into something else. I walked into that space and kept going. Marlene was still at the outer edge of the group, facing the fire. Her shoulders curved forward, and her hands folded at her waist, and the entire careful architecture of her grief arranged exactly as she had planned it. She heard her name in Doris's voice and turned. There is a version of a face a person builds when they have had enough time to design it. Marlene had been constructing that version since before she arrived on this street. I had watched it from across the road for 20 minutes. The lowered chin, the damp eyes, the posture of someone absorbing loss in real time. I watched it come apart, in the space of a single second, when she saw me standing 10 feet away in the firelight with a cold coffee cup in my hand. Her lips parted. Every last bit of color left her face as though it had somewhere more urgent to be. "Daddy?" The word came out thin and entirely without control. Not the performance, not the version meant for neighbors and investigators and the story she had been building. It came from somewhere underneath all of that, from whatever had survived when the constructed version collapsed, and I did not know what to do with it. So I did not do anything at all. I looked at her for one long moment. She was shaking, her hands pressed together against her chest, her eyes very wide, her whole body vibrating with the particular frequency of someone on whom something enormous has landed that they were certain would never come. I looked at her, and I let the moment be exactly what it was. Then I looked away. At the far edge of the crowd, a figure had stopped moving. Garrett Price returning from the north approach, as Serena had predicted, wearing the same dark jacket from the camera footage. He was looking directly at me across 30 yards of neighbors and orange light, and I could see even at that distance the exact moment his understanding of the situation recalculated into something that had no solution. He turned and moved fast in the opposite direction. He covered 11 yards. 2 officers in civilian clothes converged from the east side of the street, one cutting the angle, one coming from behind, and Garrett Price hit the grass of Calvin Draper's front yard before he could shout anything. The handcuffs went on with the practiced efficiency of people who had run this particular sequence many times before. His voice came back when they pulled him upright. He directed it generally across the yard in a volume that reached the whole block. "You set me up, old man." His jaw was clenched so hard the words came out pressured and tight. "You staged the whole thing. You were never in that house. You knew the whole time you—" "Mr. Price." The officer beside him said it once at a specific register, and the sentence ended. Garrett was walked to the nearest vehicle, still composing his version of events, still rearranging the facts into a configuration that would serve him because that was the only thing he knew how to do with both hands occupied. I watched him go, and I felt nothing that resembled satisfaction. I felt something heavier and quieter than that something that had no useful name. Serena Voss came through the remaining crowd to where Marlene was standing. Warrant in hand, her composure not displaced by a single degree from where it had been since I met her at midnight 5 days ago. She identified herself, explained the charges, and held the warrant out the way a professional holds a document, not as a weapon, just as a fact. Marlene looked at the paper. Then she looked at me across 15 feet of street. "I didn't want it to," she started. "Mrs. Price." Serena's voice was not unkind. "Let's move to the vehicle." Marlene went. At the car door, she turned and looked back once, and her eyes crossed the distance between us and found mine. and there was something in them that I could not accurately name under these circumstances, something that might have been real. And I turned to Doris Kemper, who was standing at my left, with her hand pressed flat over her mouth and tears running down both sides of her face with no sign of stopping. "Doris!" My voice came out low. "What did you ask her?" She lowered her hand. Her voice was not fully steady. "I asked her if you were inside. When she first arrived and the fire was already going, I asked if her father was still in the house." Doris pressed her lips together for a moment. She nodded, Russell. She did not say a single word. She just nodded. I looked down at the coffee cup still in my right hand. I set it carefully on the low stone edging of Doris's front garden. Then I stood with both hands at my sides and let that information settle into wherever the rest of this night had gone. Serena came to stand beside me a few minutes later. Both vehicles had left the block. The fire team was working the rear structure. The street had begun its long rearrangement into official aftermath. "Mr. Mercer, the interrogations will begin shortly. You are not required to be present." She paused. "But if you want to hear what happens in those rooms tonight, I can arrange it." "I need to hear it," I said. "I was not inside those rooms. I want to establish that clearly before anything else, because what I know about the early hours of June 25th at the Savannah Police Department, I know secondhand. I was sitting in a plastic chair in the corridor outside the administrative wing of the building on Habersham Street, holding a paper cup of hot coffee that tasted like it had been made from a recipe that had given up on itself, while the two people who had planned my death answered questions in two separate rooms 30 feet to my left. I heard none of it directly. Everything I know came from Serena Voss, who pulled the chair across from mine at 4 in the morning and told me what had happened in the order it had happened, without embellishment and without any apparent need for my reaction. "Room A," she said, opening her folder. "Garrett Price." She glanced at the page briefly, the way a person checks notes they do not actually require. He was cooperative the moment he sat down. No visible agitation, no requests, no delay. Before the first question was asked, he said, "I am reading directly. She planned it. I was the driver." I did not fully understand what she actually intended to do. That statement was volunteered. I wrapped both hands around the paper cup. He had already decided to put it on Marlene before they took the handcuffs off. "The story was built before he entered the building," Serena said. "We allowed him to speak for 8 minutes. Then we played the audio recording." She did not specify which section. We both understood which section. "He listened to his own voice for 2 minutes and 41 seconds, she said. "When the playback ended, he looked at the surface of the table. He looked at the investigator across from him. He said quietly that he would like an attorney present before he answered any further questions." She turned the page. He did not speak again after that. I exhaled slowly through my nose and said nothing. "Room B." Serena's register did not change. Marlene Price was visibly distressed from the moment she was brought in. She told us she had been under sustained psychological pressure from her husband for more than 2 years, that she had expressed opposition to his plans on multiple occasions, that she had been, her phrase, too frightened of him to make him stop. She was emotionally consistent throughout this account, and she maintained direct eye contact. Serena paused. We allowed her to speak for 12 minutes. And then, I said, we played the specific section beginning with the question. I knew the question. 4 words spoken in my own living room at 12 minutes before midnight, captured on a device inside a lamp base transmitted to a hotel room across the city, where I had sat with both hands pressed flat against a desk. 4 words I would carry with me for the rest of whatever time I had remaining. She stopped mid-posture, Serena said. She had been leaning forward in her chair throughout the account. When the audio reached that point, she sat back. She looked down at her hands in her lap. She remained that way until her attorney arrived 6 minutes later. Serena held my eyes. That recording is going to be the center of this case from the first day of trial to the last, Mr. Mercer. There is no version of that audio that a jury can be talked out of. I put the empty cup down on the floor beside my chair. The corridor was quiet in the way institutional buildings are quiet at that hour. The hum of ventilation, the distant radio of a desk officer, the occasional footstep in the stairwell to the upper floor. I had been awake for close to 20 hours, and I could feel it in my joints and behind my eyes and in the slow accumulated weight of 11 days compressed into one night. But I did not feel the kind of tired that makes a person want to sleep. I felt the kind that is simply the price of having finished something. Serena's phone lit up at 4:30. She looked at the screen and the line of her brow shifted, not concerned something closer to recognition. "Owen Daly," she said. "He saw the overnight incident report on local news. He's calling to ask whether he can add to his previous statement." She read from her screen. "He told the duty officer he wants to make sure, and I am quoting, that everything I know gets to the right people." "He's not a bad person," I said. "He just knew the wrong one." "He'll be here at 8 o'clock, Serena said. Rosalind Farr arrived in the corridor at 20 minutes past 5. Her suit jacket told me she had gone home, slept 3 hours at most, and come back. She shook my hand with a grip that held for one deliberate second longer than a professional handshake requires, and then she looked at the document in her other hand and read the formal charges aloud: conspiracy to commit murder, in the first-degree arson of an occupied dwelling, elder financial exploitation, criminal identity, theft document, forgery, and criminal assault. The full scope of 3 years of systematic fraud and the specific violence of June 24th. She read each charge the way she appeared to do everything with complete attention and without hurry. "Arraignment is Monday morning," she said. "I will see you there, Mr. Mercer." After she left, Serena stayed in the corridor. She looked at me with the particular expression of a person who has one remaining item and is choosing their approach. "Before the interview concluded, Mrs. Price made a request through her attorney," she said. "She is asking whether you would agree to speak with her. Brief supervised this morning before transport to the county facility. You are under no obligation of any kind." I looked at the empty paper cup on the floor beside my chair. Then I looked at the wall at the end of the corridor, the plain institutional wall with nothing on it. My jaw tightened until I felt it in my back teeth. My ribs gave their familiar low protest. I thought about a box of birthday cards on a kitchen table, and about the year when there was no card, and about a single slow nod on a street-lit orange with what used to be my home. I turned my face away from Serena's question and looked at the far end of the hallway. She understood. She closed the folder, stood, and walked back the way she had come. The financial picture came in pieces, the way damage always does when someone has spent years being careful about it. Margaret Holloway's office on Drayton Street had floor-to-ceiling bookshelves on 3 walls, and a window that looked out over the oak canopy along the street below. She sat across the desk from me on a Wednesday morning in early July, and laid the full accounting out in the same organized manner I had come to expect from her. No unnecessary preamble, no hedging of numbers that did not need hedging. The check from Theodore's estate could now be deposited. The bank had held it through the legal proceedings surrounding the events of June, and with the formal charges filed and both defendants in custody, there was no remaining impediment to processing it. She had already contacted Gerald Thornton's branch. I could go in that afternoon. "The fraudulent accounts," I said. "What happens to those?" 3 of the lending institutions have already filed to pursue restitution from the defendants as part of the criminal proceedings. The remaining 2 are still in review. She folded her hands on the desk. "Your personal credit file has been flagged for correction with all 3 major reporting agencies. The fraudulent entries should begin clearing within 60 days. You are not liable for a single dollar of the debt that was created in your name. That obligation belongs entirely to the people who manufactured it. I sat with that for a moment. $218,000 that had existed under my name for 3 years, accumulating interest sitting in systems I knew nothing about, owned by people whose addresses were in places I had never been. And now it was being unwound document by document in the same careful order someone else had built it. The insurance claim Margaret explained was more complicated. The fire marshal's report confirmed incendiary origin, which under Georgia law triggered a specific review process. The fraudulent beneficiary modification Garrett had made 8 months ago was legally void from the moment he made it. A modification made without the policyholder's knowledge or consent carried no legal weight, which meant it had never been valid to begin with. My claim was proceeding under the original policy structure. She expected the initial property assessment within 30 days. Your legal costs, I said. The criminal prosecution costs you nothing. The district attorney's office is the plaintiff in that case. My fees for the estate and civil remediation work are charged at the rate Theodore negotiated when he first retained me. She allowed herself the brief, restrained warmth she permitted on certain occasions. He was very thorough about that arrangement as well. I walked from Drayton Street to the branch on Bull Street that afternoon. Gerald Thornton was in his customary position when I came through the glass door. He saw me cross the lobby, and something in his bearing shifted the quiet relief of a man who has been waiting for a specific moment and is glad it has come. He led me to his office without ceremony. 40 minutes later, I walked out of that building with a deposit receipt in my jacket pocket that represented the first solid ground I had stood on in 8 months since Theodore's death, and 11 days since everything that had followed it. Gerald had also prepared the safe deposit box. Theodore had maintained it at this branch for 11 years. The access authorization was in Margaret's files. The box was standard-sized, the metal rectangle that slides from the vault housing, with a dry, precise sound, and Gerald set it on the table in the small private room off the main floor and left me alone with it. Inside a manila envelope containing the estate documents Margaret had already briefed me on in full. A small velvet pouch, and beneath both of those a sealed white envelope with my name on it in Theodore's handwriting. Not the envelope Margaret had given me at the bank on June 14th. Smaller. Just my name, nothing else written in his careful, deliberate print. I opened the velvet pouch first, our father's watch. A round-faced Hamilton in a silver case with a leather strap that had been resold once that I remembered, and probably other times I had not been present for. Theodore had kept it after our father died, and I had assumed without ever saying so that it would stay with him. The face was exactly as I remembered the small, slightly uneven numerals, the faded, luminous hands, the particular quality of an object that has been worn and carried long enough to hold the shape of a life. I turned it over. The back of the case had been engraved. I knew it had not always been engraved. I had held that watch as a child, and the back was smooth. This was recent. Clean and carefully done, the kind of inscription that costs thought before it costs anything else. For the man who kept going, T. The night before the arrests, I had written to Theodore that I was going to be all right. He had answered from somewhere prior to any of this in 4 words on the back of our father's watch. I set the watch down on the table. I pressed the back of my hand against my eyes hard, the way you press against something that is trying to find a way out. And I stayed that way for a long moment, breathing through it, letting the sharpest part of what I felt work its way through. The small room was very quiet. The ventilation made its low sound. When I had gathered myself, I looked at the sealed white envelope, my name on the front. Nothing else. I put the watch on my wrist. The leather strap was slightly loose. Theodore's wrist had always been thinner than mine, and I would need to have it adjusted. But I wore it out of the room and through the bank lobby and through the glass door onto Bull Street, where the July heat sat on everything like a second atmosphere. Everett was parked at the corner with the truck running for the air conditioning. He looked at the watch when I got in, and he understood without being told what it was or where it had come from. I put my hand against the inside of my jacket pocket where the sealed envelope sat. "He left a second letter," I said, "separate from everything else." Everett put the truck in gear. He thought about it for a moment before he said anything. "You'll know when to open it," he said. I believed him. The Chatham County Courthouse on Montgomery Street in downtown Savannah was built more than a century ago and carries that history in its bones, marble floors that register every footfall, ceilings designed to remind anyone who enters that the institution is considerably larger than any individual inside it, and the particular smell of sustained official purpose that old courthouses develop over decades and never release. I had dressed deliberately that morning. A suit I had kept for 12 years, pressed the night before with Everett's iron, which he ran over every crease twice without being asked. I stood at the mirror in his spare room for a long moment before leaving, not inspecting myself but orienting, reminding myself of the specific weight of what the day was going to require. Judge Harold Boone had presided over Chatham County Superior Court for 19 years. He was 64, broad-shouldered, with the unhurried diction of a man who had heard every kind of argument and had learned to give each one exactly the amount of time it deserved, no more. Rosalind Farr had described him to me the previous week simply as someone who did not allow theatrics. That was the entirety of her endorsement, and it was enough. The courtroom held perhaps 60 people in the gallery by the time both cases were called. I sat in the third row with Everett to my left and Margaret Holloway to my right. I had asked them both to come without explaining exactly why I needed them there. They had both come without asking me to explain. Garrett Price was brought in first. He was in a suit that did not fit the way it once had, his face thinner, the particular controlled ease of his posture replaced by something more deliberate, more careful. He did not look at the gallery. He kept his eyes on his attorney and on the space in front of him, and when Judge Boone read the charges and asked for his plea, his attorney spoke the words, "Not guilty, Your Honor." Garrett's expression did not shift. Rosalind argued against bail with the efficiency of someone who had prepared this argument with specific attention to every available factor. The scale of the documented fraud, the existing connection to an organized gambling operation, the demonstrated pattern of escalating behavior, and the fact that there were individuals outside the legal system with their own reasons to locate Garrett Price before a trial date. Judge Boone listened without interruption. He denied bail and remanded Garrett to the Chatham County Detention Facility pending trial. He said it in 14 words. Marlene was brought in separately. She looked smaller than she had the last time I saw her, in the orange light of a burning house on a residential street at midnight. She had her hands folded in front of her, and her eyes moved through the courtroom in a single sweep before settling on her attorney. She did not look in my direction. Her attorney entered a plea of not guilty. The bail argument was more contested. Her attorney argued no prior record, strong community ties, nonviolent history. Rosalind argued the cooperation in planning and the specific recorded statement. Judge Boone set bail at $250,000 and ordered GPS monitoring as a mandatory condition, along with a no-contact order covering Russell Mercer, Doris Kemper, and any witness listed by the prosecution. A family member posted the bond that afternoon. In the hallway outside the courtroom afterward, neither Everett nor Margaret said anything about what had just happened. Everett put his hand briefly on my shoulder. Margaret told me she would call with next steps. I thanked them both. We went to our separate cars. September arrived the way September arrives in Savannah, with the first genuine suggestion that the heat will eventually relent, the light changing at its edges, the mornings cool enough to want a jacket by 7 o'clock. I moved back to the Abercorn Street property in a temporary arrangement. The back portion of the house was uninhabitable and under active reconstruction, but the front rooms had been cleaned, dried, and declared structurally sound by the contractor. I slept in the house I had lived in for 40 years, with the sound of construction starting at 7 each morning, and the smell of new lumber replacing the smell of smoke, gradually week by week. I wore Theodore's watch every day. In mid-October, Rosalind Farr called me on a Tuesday afternoon. "I need to inform you of a development," she said, "and I want your position before I make any decision. Marlene Price's attorney has filed a formal cooperation offer. She is willing to provide complete testimony against Garrett Price, all communications, all planning conversations, full corroboration of the timeline in exchange for the prosecution, reducing her primary charge from conspiracy to commit murder to a lesser felony with a negotiated sentence." Rosalind paused. Her testimony would be significant. The recording is strong, but a cooperating witness with direct knowledge of every conversation closes every gap a defense attorney might try to exploit. It makes the case against Garrett Price substantially more certain. I looked at the wall across from where I was standing. The front room of my house still smelling faintly of char in the corners, despite everything the morning light coming through the window, the same way it had always come through that window for 40 years. "What I need from you, Mr. Mercer," Rosalind said, "is whether you have an objection. Not legally binding, but I want to hear it." I looked at my father's watch on my wrist. The small, worn face, the engraving I could not see from the outside but knew was there. "I'll call you back before 5, I said. I drove to the property on the south end of the lot, where the contractor's team was working on the frame of the rebuilt rear section. There was one portion of the original wall that had survived without significant structural damage, a 12-foot section of the north interior wall standing in the middle of the new framing, like something that had decided not to leave. I stood in front of it for a long time. Then I took out my phone and called Rosalind Farr. The first morning of trial in March of 2024 arrived the way things you have been preparing for always arrive sooner than expected and later than it felt. I had spent the intervening time in ways that were not always organized or intentional, rebuilding the rear portion of the house, attending pre-trial hearings at regular intervals, meeting with Rosalind and Margaret, as the preparation compressed into the final weeks before the date. I slept in the front rooms of my house with the sound of construction gradually replaced by the sound of completion. Theodore's watch had become something I noticed less and less with each passing month, which was I had come to understand precisely the way a thing you carry should eventually work. I sat in the gallery on the first morning with Everett to my left and Margaret on my right, the same formation as the arraignment, because that positioning had held once, and there was no reason to change it. Judge Boone called the session to order at 9:15. 90 people went to the concentrated quiet that forms in a room when everyone inside it understands that something of consequence is about to begin, and that their job is to receive it fully. Rosalind Farr's opening statement lasted 41 minutes. I had heard portions of it in preparation and had read the outline twice. But hearing it delivered in its entirety in that room, with the specific weight of everything that had been assembled behind each sentence, was a different thing from reading a document. She did not raise her voice. She did not repeat herself. She laid the 3-year scheme out the way an architect lays out a structure from the foundation to the roof in the correct sequence, so that by the time she finished, the jury had not been instructed what to conclude, but had been shown in complete and verifiable detail what existed. She called me to the stand on the second day. I had prepared for it carefully, but preparation and the actual experience of sitting in a witness chair and delivering your own life into a public record are genuinely different things. I answered Rosalind's questions in the order she put them clearly and without supplementary detail. The assault of June 14th. The check and its security mechanism. The 11 documents found behind the safe. The recording. The fire. I said each thing once and looked at the jury when I spoke, not at the defense table where Garrett sat with the particular stillness of a man who has been coached to show nothing. His attorney crossed me for 40 minutes, suggesting impaired memory, disputing the severity of the documented injuries. I answered each question with the same precision, and I kept my voice level and my hands still on the railing in front of me. And when it was over, I stepped down and returned to my seat. The recording was entered into evidence and played for the jury on the fourth day. This was different from hearing it in a hotel room at 1 in the morning. In the hotel, the stakes had been entirely personal. 2 people in a small space, the outcome of everything we had built over 11 days, compressed into a laptop speaker. In Courtroom B of the Chatham County Superior Court in March of 2024, 90 people heard those same words through speakers mounted at the corners of the room. And when the 4-word question came through, clear, unhurried in Marlene's voice exactly as she had said it, the collective stillness that fell over the room was the kind I had never experienced in a public place before, and expect never to experience again. 3 jurors turned to look at Garrett Price. 1 turned to look at me. I kept my face entirely still and did not look away. Marlene Price took the stand on the 7th day. She had cut her hair since the arraignment. She wore a plain gray jacket and sat in the witness chair with her hands folded in her lap and looked at Rosalind Farr with the expression of someone who has settled in private and in advance the argument they were having with themselves about what they came to do. Rosalind walked her through the timeline in chronological order. Marlene answered every question directly, the debt, the planning conversations. She had witnessed the decision, made in specific terms on specific dates the night of June 20th. Her voice was level. She did not cry. She did not soften anything or redirect her answers. When Rosalind reached the specific question, the moment in the living room, she asked Marlene to describe in her own words what she had said to her husband that night. Marlene unfolded her hands in her lap and then folded them again. A single breath. Then she said the words herself, out loud, in open court, in front of 90 people and a jury and a judge and her father sitting 12 feet behind her in the 3rd row of the gallery. In the gallery, I put my thumb against the face of my father's watch and pressed until I felt the steel edge of the case against my skin. I breathed through my nose. I looked at the ceiling for exactly 1 second, and then I looked back at the room. Garrett's defense called 2 witnesses and rested on the 9th day. Rosalind's closing argument ran 22 minutes. The jury deliberated for 4 hours and 19 minutes, guilty on all counts. Judge Boone accepted the verdict, thanked the jury, and set sentencing for the 2nd week of May 2024. When the gavel came down, I heard Everett exhale beside me, a long, slow breath, the particular kind that has been held for a fixed number of months, and is finally, at a specific moment, allowed to leave. I looked at the watch on my wrist. I thought, it is time. I opened the letter on a Tuesday morning in the 1st week of May. Not because I had planned the timing. I had carried it in my jacket pocket for 10 months, transferring it from jacket to jacket, each season setting it on the kitchen counter, each night before bed, and returning it to the pocket each morning. On the morning of the 3rd of May, 11 days before sentencing, I woke at 5:30, made coffee, and sat at the kitchen table in my rebuilt house for the first time since the rear section had been completed the previous month. The new window looked out over the back garden. The soil was fresh, the planting deliberate, the drainage correct for the first time in 27 years. I picked up the envelope from the counter where it had been overnight. I opened it. Theodore's letter was 3 pages long. His handwriting, the measured, deliberate print I had known since before either of us could drive, was slightly more careful in the first 2 pages, and somewhat looser in the 3rd, as though he had written it in 2 sessions with time between them. He had dated it at the top September 12th, 2021, 14 months before he died. I will not quote all of it here. Some of it belongs to us and not to any accounting of events. but there are portions I carry now the way I carry the watch so thoroughly that the weight has stopped being noticeable. The letter opened. Russell, if you are reading this, then things went the way I hoped, which means you are alive, and the other thing happened instead. Good. That is the correct outcome. He had known about the diagnosis, he wrote, for 8 months before he told anyone. 8 months of appointments and results, and the slow adjustment of understanding a timeline managed in his house in Augusta, while he continued to do exactly what he had always done and said nothing to me or anyone else about any of it. I did not tell you because you would have driven down every weekend and sat with me and eaten everything in my refrigerator and been sad in a way that would have been exhausting for both of us. This is not a criticism. It is simply what would have happened. You have never been able to help yourself where I was concerned, and I am aware that this was true in the other direction as well. On the watch, our father always believed it should have been yours. He gave it to me because you were 12 years old and would have misplaced it within a week. He was almost certainly correct. You are 65 now, and I still have reservations, but I am out of better options. On the house, the drainage in the back garden has been wrong since 1997. I told you this in 2003, and you laid topsoil over a drainage problem, and then informed me the matter was resolved. It was not resolved. Now that the entire rear section has been rebuilt from the ground up, there is no reason it should not be addressed properly. I have left the specifications with Margaret. She has the name of the contractor. Please use them. I mean that literally. And on the third page, in the looser handwriting of the second, sitting a paragraph near the end, you have been the better man in most circumstances I can remember clearly. Not because you were stronger or wiser, because you kept going past the point where I would have stopped. I have noticed this for most of our lives and said nothing about it, because saying it would have required the kind of conversation neither of us would have handled without a great deal of discomfort. Consider it said now. You were always going to be all right. I wanted to make certain of it. The watch was always yours. I read it once through without pausing. Then I set it face down on the table and pressed both palms flat against the wood and looked at the garden through the new window. What happened after that is mine. It does not belong to any account of what occurred or how. I will say only that I sat at that table for a long time, and that somewhere in the middle of that time the thing I had been holding in careful order since the afternoon of my 67th birthday, since the floor of my own bedroom, and Garrett's footsteps, and the envelope with my brother's handwriting, and the 11 documents, and the fire, and the watch, and the verdict, and all of it, that thing finally, completely, and without my permission, came apart. When Everett's truck pulled into the drive later that morning, I was standing at the window with a second cup of coffee looking at the garden. He came through the door, saw the letter open on the table, took in whatever my face looked like, and went directly to the cabinet for the second mug. He filled it, brought it to the counter beside mine, and came to stand at the window next to me. He did not ask anything or offer anything. He simply looked at the garden. "The drainage is fixed," I said after a while. "I can see that," he said. We stood there for a while longer. That evening, I sat on the front porch of the house on Abercorn Street, the rebuilt porch, the boards a lighter color than the rest of the wood, which would weather to match in a year or two. The neighborhood was doing what it always does in May, the last of the big azaleas, a lawnmower 2 blocks over that had been running since late afternoon, the mockingbirds in the sycamore, carrying on a dispute of some kind that would not be resolved before dark, and probably not after it either. I held Theodore's letter and the 3 pages of it, and thought about a good many things, most of them not about the courthouse. Then I folded the pages carefully and put them back in my jacket pocket, where they had been for 10 months. I went inside. I went to bed. I slept 8 unbroken hours. The next morning I drove to the Chatham County Courthouse on Montgomery Street, parked in the same lot as every previous visit, walked up the front steps in the early May light, and pushed through the heavy door. The sentencing hearing for Garrett Price was called at 9 o'clock on the morning of May 14th. Sentencing hearings draw a different attendance than trials. The gallery held perhaps 40 people, a handful of journalists who had covered the case since the previous March, several observers from the legal community, Everett and Margaret, in the same positions they had maintained at every prior proceeding in this courthouse. There was a row toward the back that contained people I did not recognize, and I did not look at them for long. Garrett Price was brought in at 9:12. He sat at the defense table and looked at the space directly in front of him. Rosalind called me to deliver the victim impact statement first. I had written it at a kitchen table in the dark period between the fire and the trial, and I had not revised it since. 11 months of additional clarity had not changed what the document needed to say. I walked to the lectern and unfolded the 2 pages I had been carrying in my jacket pocket, alongside Theodore's letter for the past week. The statement described an order lying on the floor of my own bedroom, while the sound of someone searching it came through the walls, and what it takes to get back to standing after that. 3 years of debt accumulated under my name in institutions I had never contacted, and what it means to learn that your identity had been worn by someone else like a coat they intended to keep. The fire, what it is to sit across a street at midnight and watch the house you spent 40 years building your life inside burn in a pattern that a professional will later describe as deliberately designed. And then near the end, the paragraph I had written and rewritten until it held only what was true. I am 67 years old. I have lived in this city for most of those years. I have buried a brother. I have watched a daughter make choices I do not have adequate language to describe. What I am asking this court to understand is not what was taken from me that is documented in the record and needs no additional elaboration. What I am asking is that the court understand what it costs to have expected the ordinary end of an ordinary life, and then to spend the final years of your working life ensuring that someone else's plan for you does not succeed. That cost does not have a dollar amount. I folded the pages and returned to my seat. I did not look at the defense table. Garrett's attorney argued for a sentence structured around his client's absence of prior violent criminal history and what he characterized as a deteriorating financial situation that had produced decisions his client recognized as catastrophic errors in judgment. He spoke for 19 minutes. He was professional, and he had very little to work with, and he understood that. Rosalind's argument lasted 9 minutes. She cited the documented duration of the scheme, the systematic nature of the exploitation, the recorded statement of intent, and the specific and deliberate steps taken to execute the fire, the purchase of accelerant, its methodical application to the base of a residential structure, the timing designed to ensure the occupant would be inside. She used the word deliberate 5 times. It was accurate each time. Judge Boone reviewed his papers for a sustained moment before he raised his eyes. "The court has reviewed the complete record," he said. "The audio evidence, the financial documentation, the medical evidence regarding the victim's injuries, and the fire marshal's report. What this record describes is not an act produced by desperation or poor judgment under pressure. It describes a campaign conducted over 3 years with deliberate escalation at each stage against a 67-year-old man who had given the primary defendant no justification for any of it." He paused. "The court finds no mitigating circumstances that materially alter that finding." He looked directly at the defense table. "On the count of conspiracy to commit murder in the first degree, this court sentences Garrett Price to 22 years in the custody of the Georgia Department of Corrections without eligibility for parole consideration during the first 14 years of that sentence." He went through the remaining counts in sequence: the arson charge, the elder financial exploitation, the identity theft, the forgery. Each charge carried its own designated term, each running concurrent with the primary sentence. The total was a number that represented the remainder of any reasonable span of Garrett Price's current life. The gavel struck once. I watched Garrett Price stand and be directed toward the exit by the two officers who had been positioned at the edge of the room throughout the proceeding. He did not look at me as he was walked past. He looked at the door ahead of him, and then the door closed, and he was gone. Rosalind came to me in the gallery afterward and shook my hand with the same grip she had used at the arraignment firm, brief and meaning something. "You read it well," she said, meaning the statement. I thanked her. She had a case on the floor above in 20 minutes, and she left without ceremony, which suited everyone. Margaret spoke to me in the corridor outside. She had a folder with her that she did not open. She told me quietly that Marlene's cooperation agreement had been finalized in January, her plea entered before Garrett's trial began, and her sentencing completed in February, 8 years, with specific conditions attached to the period following release. She said all of it in the measured way she said difficult things, and I listened, and we stood in the corridor for a moment after she finished. "Is there anything else today?" I asked her. "Nothing that can't wait until next week," she said. Everett drove me home. I did not go directly inside. I went around the side of the house and through the gate into the back garden. The May afternoon was warm and clear, the new soil holding its level correctly. For the first time in 27 years, the drainage working the way Theodore's instructions had specified it should. I crouched at the edge of the first planted bed and looked at the section I had put in 6 days earlier on the morning after reading the letter, with no particular expectation beyond the motion of doing it. In the corner of the fresh soil, not yet an inch high, a single stem had pushed its way through the surface. Green, thin, unhurried, entirely certain of itself. I stayed crouched at the edge of that bed for a long time and did not move. The letter from Rosalind Farr's office arrived on a Thursday morning in late October in a standard envelope with the Chatham County seal in the upper left corner. I recognized the return address before I had finished pulling it from the box. I set it on the kitchen table and made coffee first. The letter was 3 paragraphs. The first confirmed that Garrett Price had been sentenced the previous afternoon by Judge Harold Boone to 22 years in Georgia State Prison, with no possibility of parole consideration before the 14th year. The second paragraph noted that the court had entered a full restitution order covering the fraudulent accounts every dollar, with interest calculated from the date of each offense. The third paragraph informed me that the case file was now closed and thanked me for my cooperation throughout the proceedings. I read it twice. Then I folded it along its original crease and set it beside my coffee cup. I did not feel what I had expected to feel. I had carried the anticipation of this moment for 16 months, and what arrived instead of triumph was something quieter, not relief exactly, but the specific stillness that follows a very long effort when the effort is finally finished. The way a room sounds after someone stops knocking. I called Everett. He picked up on the second ring. "I heard," he said before I could speak. "Serena called me this morning. 22 years. "Yes." A pause. "You all right?" "I think so," I said. "I am not certain what all right feels like yet." "That is probably the correct answer," Everett said. I called Margaret Holloway next. She had already seen the filing. She confirmed the restitution order was enforceable and that her office would monitor compliance quarterly. She told me I did not need to do anything further. She said it the way she said things that were meant to be final plainly, without ornamentation, in the voice of someone who had carried the weight of this alongside me and was now setting it down. After I hung up, I went out to the back porch and stood at the edge of the porch light where the garden began. The fig tree had put on another 8 inches since August. Calvin had noticed it from his porch 2 weeks earlier and made a remark about patience being its own kind of skill. Theodore had planned for this tree. He had planned for the drainage and the soil and the afternoon light in that corner. He had planned for a garden that would outlast him, tended by someone he trusted to follow the instructions, even when following them was difficult. He had also planned for a bank protocol, a sealed cavity behind a safe, a letter delivered at the right moment, and a watch engraved with 7 words. He had planned for me. I stood at the edge of the porch light and looked at the fig tree for a long time. Then I went inside, sat at the kitchen table, and wrote Theodore a letter. I would never send the way I had been writing to him since August of the previous year, when Everett had suggested it, and I had pretended to think it was unnecessary before doing it the same night. I told him what the sentence was. I told him the garden was doing well. I told him I had started sleeping without the light on again, which had taken longer than I would admit to most people. I told him I was still going. If you've stayed with me through this entire Grandpa story, thank you, truly. Looking back honestly, I trusted too easily. I gave love without boundaries and forgot to protect myself. Don't be like me. You can love your children deeply and still hold a line. Be generous, not naive. I learned that lesson far too late, and it cost more than I care to name. What carried me through, God placed the right people beside me at every step. Theodore, who planned ahead in secret. Everett, who never left. Father Stull, who always knew when words were unnecessary. Faith for me was never a feeling. It was the decision to take one more step when I had no particular reason to. This is my family story, and every family story holds both darkness and the quiet loyalty of those who choose to stay. If this Grandpa story moved something in you, leave a comment below. Share it with someone who needs to hear it. Subscribe and hit the bell if you want more Grandpa stories like this one. It means more than you know. One important note, every family story shared on this channel contains dramatized elements crafted for educational purposes. If this content is not the right fit for you, please find something that serves you better. I respect that choice completely. Thank you for staying until the very end.